What's up, Wizards? It's Dev from the Strictly Better Detective Agency, and this bit is already over. It's just way too hot in my house to be wearing like all of this stuff, to be honest with you. So I'm not going to put myself or you through all of this nonsense for like an entire video, right? I don't really wear ties or anything. I don't tend to do that. So let me just kind of get comfortable here for just a second, and then we'll get back to the video. Anyway, who wants to talk about murders? That's right. There were some murders down at the old Karlov place. We got to check those out, but we got plenty of clues to look over. Wizards gave us 60 plus cards on day one to look at from this monster of a set. And there's a lot of good stuff, so we got to go ahead and get to it. Actually, just one more thing before we jump in, if you don't mind. Welcome to preview season. I missed you. Let's have a good one together. But let's start as usual by zipping through some commons and uncommons. But that's a pretty good chance to look at the mechanics in this set. You might want to pay attention because you'll recognize a couple of these, but there's plenty of brand new mechanics that you want to know about. So let's run through these. Let's start by looking at some of the new Investigate stuff. You guys know Investigate, right? You get a little clue, artifact token, you pay 2, you sack it, you draw a card, that kind of stuff. So let's start with Auspicious Arrival, Loxodon Eavesdropper, and simply Knife. Auspicious Arrival is just 2 mana, 1 and a white. For an instant, a creature gets +2/+2 till end of turn, and then you investigate. Kind of fancy, but you know, mostly for limited as a lot of these cards are going to be. So let's take a look at Loxodon Eavesdropper. 4 mana, 3 and a green for a 3/3 Elephant Detective. How? Whenever Loxodon, I guess he remembers everything. That works. But anyway, when he ETBs, you investigate. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, Eavesdropper gets +1/+1 and gains Vigilance until end of turn. So you might have a 4 mana 4/4 Vigilance here that makes a clue when it comes into play. I just think the fact that it makes a clue when it comes into play is kind of sweet enough. Another cool little drafty thing. But Mac the Knife over here is just a single red mana for an artifact that is also a clue and also an equipment. As long as it's your turn, equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has first strike. You can equip this for 2, or you can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card because it is a clue. Neat little thing here. Now, 2 mana is kind of a lot to equip this, especially considering what you're actually getting for equipping it, but it is just a single mana to do artifact matters stuff or clue matters stuff, and later on you can trade it in for a card. It's actually not too bad. Might take a stab at it myself, but one way or the other, let's move on to a brand new mechanic, everybody. It's Collect Evidence. We got to see this on a couple of low rarity cards today, like Bite Down on Crime, that's a great name, and Crime Stopper Sprite to start. Now, as much as I appreciate a good reference, I'm not too excited about McGruff here, but let's go through it bit by bit. Bite Down on Crime is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a sorcery. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 till end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. But here's the deal. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may Collect Evidence 6. The spell costs 2 less to cast if evidence was collected. I do like that verbiage, but let's read the reminder text here. Make sure we know what Collect Evidence is. To Collect Evidence 6, exile cards with total mana value 6 or greater from your graveyard. This ability does look cool, though. It's basically a fixed delve, but they really fixed it an awful lot, man. It's kind of bad in a few specific ways. You know, you can't get rid of lands for this ability. I mean, you can. It's just not going to matter. You can't get rid of, like, 0-cost stuff in your yard. You can't cast, like, a bunch of 1 and 2 mana spells in the first couple of turns and really collect a lot of evidence, right? You can, but again, it's going to take an awful lot of setup and cards out of your hand and mana and whatever. So, you know, it's a little bit different than Delve. That said, you can still mill yourself like Delve and maybe hit like a huge spell in your yard, and suddenly you can collect evidence very easily, right? Because you got like a 6-drop in your yard. So I do kind of like the idea of this ability, and it's a little bit more thought out than Delve, but it's also considerably less powerful in a lot of ways. But I'll say again, this is undeniably a really powerful ability, and it all kind of depends on what a card is doing with this mechanic. It could be very powerful, or it could be Crime Stopper Spray. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 Fairy Detective. As an additional cost to cast it, you can Collect Evidence 6. It has flying, and when it ETBs, you tap a creature. Now, if evidence was collected, you put a stun counter on the creature. I kind of like this as a way to utilize this mechanic because, you know, it's a Windrake that's still kind of a Frost Lynx, like in a way. It's kind of both of those cards slammed together and made to kiss. So I like both of those cards in limited. You know, I like Windrakes, I like Frostlinks, I like tapping stuff down in blue, playing a little tempo, whatever. And this just does that, and it's going to do that no matter what. You don't even have to collect the evidence, but if you want to play a little better tempo game, maybe you collect some evidence. So I also like that this makes the card a little bit better in the late game when you draw it off the top of your library. That's a cool way to use the ability too. But if you draw it, in your opening hand, you want to play it on turn 3, you still get good tempo off of it. That's pretty cool. For what it's worth, and I think it's worth something, we did get to see the collect evidence mechanic on a couple of other uncommons and commons that are a lot more powerful than what I've already shown you, like Extract the Confession and Mtg Inspector. Now, Extract is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect evidence 6. Each opponent sacks a creature. If evidence was collected, instead each opponent sacks a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. So, an ability that usually costs 3 mana, condensed into 2 mana if you can collect a fair amount of evidence. If you get this late in the game, it's not as dead as an edict effect would usually be, and your opponent has like a million tokens or whatever. In this case, if you do rip it late game and you got some evidence in your yard, then suddenly it's a really good removal spell, even at sorcery speed, which is kind of a problem with this card, but they had to balance it, right? You can just cast this as an edict effect for 2 mana, which is kind of good in the first place, so I don't mind the sorcery speed too much. Now, Mtg Inspector is somehow a common. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 1/3 elf detective. As an additional cost to cast it, you can collect 6 evidence. It has reach, and when it enters the battlefield, if evidence was collected, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and you gain 2 life. Pretty good. I mean, it makes sense, I guess, that it's a common, but I would expect this some of the time to be a common. It's a 2 mana 2/4 with reach, and you gain 2 on ETB. That's really, really good, man. I mean, a 2 mana 1/3 reach is fine and playable in limited, right? But again, this is one of those things that safeguards you for the late game, because late in the game, you're not just pulling a 2 mana 1/3, you're pulling a 2 mana 2/4 and getting a little bit of life back, which again, I think is going to be worth it a lot of the time in limited. Solid little dude. Let's move on to yet another new mechanic in this set. We are far from done with these. There's a few more after this, but we got to take a look at the disguise mechanic, a face down mechanic as predicted by basically every single person on the internet. We got to look at Night Drinker Moroi, as well as Gadget Technician, and my personal favorite of these, Dog Walker. Now, Night Drinker is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 4/2 vampire with flying, and when it ETBs, you lose 3 life, but you can disguise it for 2 black mana. You may cast this card face down for 3 as a 2/2 creature with ward 2. Turn it face up at any time for its disguise cost. So if you pay 3 mana, this is a 2/2 ward. It's a lot like morphing a creature, where you can pay 3 and just have a 2/2. But they decided to just make it better for no reason this time around. So instead of just like a vanilla 2/2, like a Scade Zombies or something, now you pay 3, you get a 2/2 with ward 2, which is many, many, many times better. But in any case, in this case, you're not going to lose the 3 life if you intend on flipping it up, which is kind of cool. But I don't think this is actually that good, to be honest. If you flip it up on blocks, you're probably still going to lose it, no matter what blocked it. One cool thing before we move on to the next card, though, about flipping these up, is that it does not employ the stack in any way and cannot be responded to, which is really, really interesting. But let's move on to Gadget Technician here. This looks a little bit better, to be honest. This is 4 mana, 2, a blue and a red for a 3/2 Goblin Artificer, and when it enters the battlefield or is turned face up, you get a 1/1 Thopter with flying, and you can disguise this for blue-red hybrid. So again, if you turn this up in blocks, it's probably still going to die on blocks, like no matter what blocked it. So that's not super great, but at least it's going to leave a 1/1 Thopter behind. So I don't know, it's not terrible. And if you just pay the full price for it and you just forego disguising it, you still have 4 mana for 4 power, 1 of which flies, 2 bodies. Again, in limited, that's probably D's. But let's look at the Nostalgia Critic next. Doug Walker, it's actually Dog Walker, 2 mana, Boros colors, a red and a white, for a 3/1 human citizen with vigilance. And when it's turned face up, you create 2 1/1 tapped white dog creature tokens. You can disguise this for 2 Boros hybrid mana. Now, this has kind of the same, air quotes, problem, because I'm not even sure it's a problem, as some of the other disguise cards we've already seen, at least in the lower rarities. And that is that there doesn't look like there's going to be a whole lot of blowouts in combat because somebody flipped their guy up, right? And I think Wizards did this on purpose in the past with Morph as a mechanic in certain sets. there were times when it could be very stressful to do combat in limited because you don't know who's going to flip a guy up and completely blow you out in combat, right? So it doesn't look like that's going to be as much of an issue, again, at least from what we've seen of the lower rarities in this mechanic so far. But it does look like, things like Gadget Technician and now Dog Walker, maybe you still lose your guy in combat. You flip up your Dog Walker, he's still going to die, but still leaves 2 tokens behind. The Gadget Technician, he's going to die in combat, leave a token behind. That kind of incremental board advantage, fighting it out bit for bit, wars of attrition. I tend to like stuff like that. So I kind of like the look of the disguise mechanic in terms of its implications for limited. So with that in mind, let's look at some more disguise stuff, right? We got Defenestrated Phantom and Branch of Vitu-Ghazi here. Now, Defenestrated Phantom, first of all, points off, because I don't think this is the guy from Defenestrate. It's really hard to tell because you can't see that guy's face, but I would really like it to be the dude from Defenestrate. I'm just not sure it is, so points off or on, depending on if it is or is not. But either way, Defenestrated Phantom is 6 mana, 4 and 2 white for a 4/3 spirit with flying. Now you can disguise this for 4 and a white. So again, you pay 3, you get a 2/2 ward. You flip it up for the 5 mana cost, and it becomes a 4/3 flyer. So this could technically blow things out on blocks, but it takes 5 mana. So far, it's following the same rule from Khans of Tarkir, the rule of 5, in case you've never heard of it. Basically, your opponent's not going to blow you out on blocks by flipping a creature up unless they have at least 5 open mana. That was the rule back then, and it appears so far, again at these lower rarities, to be the rule in this set. But Branch of the Vitu-Ghazi over here, this is interesting because it's a land that taps for colorless, but you can disguise 3 here. And when it's turned face up, you add 2 mana of any one color. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases in. So if you flip it up during combat, it just becomes a land. That's kind of neat, right? You can basically block with this and then flip it up, becomes a land, and nothing happens unless the creature it blocked has trample, and then you got to take the damage. But you can just kind of block with this. No harm, no foul. Flip it up and add 2 mana, which is kind of neat, right? You can use that to cast spells during your opponent's turn. Or, conversely, if you come in with this and your opponent blocks it, you can kind of make sure it doesn't die by flipping it up. And then it's going to pay you back all but one of the mana that you used to flip it up, which I think is kind of neat too. So altogether, really cool card. I'm not sure that it beats out other creature lands in standard, but it's still cool. I like the design. There are even a couple of cards that care about face down cards, like Expose the Culprit and Sumala Sentry. Now, Expose the Culprit is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant. Choose one or both. Turn target face down creature face up, or exile any number of face up creatures you control with disguise in a face down pile. Shuffle that pile and then cloak them. So this will teach us what the cloak mechanic is. To cloak a card, put it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature with ward 2. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. So cloaking is a little bit like manifesting from back in the day, if you remember that ability. You don't? I'm old. I do. So was that what it was called? I really hope I'm not making a goof here and calling it something else. But either way, we've seen mechanics like this a little bit in the past. So this isn't too confusing. But either way, this is mostly a card for flavor purposes. Just not a great card, to be honest. But Sumala Sentry looks okay. 2 mana, green and a white for a 1/3 elf archer with reach. And whenever a face down permanent you control is turned face up, you put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, and you put a +1/+1 counter on Sumala Sentry. Okay, so the way I see it, if you ever turn one thing face up in limited, this pays for itself, man. You paid 2 mana to put 4 power on the table in that situation, which is pretty sweet. And it's really important, I think, to note that you can play this turn 2 in limited and then disguise a thing on turn 3 to kind of set it up. And once you do turn that thing face up, almost no matter what it is, it's going to get way, way better. It's also going to set some lines up where you do get those blowouts on blocks like you might want. So I think this is a pretty important card for limited. But can we get one more new mechanic in here? I think we can. Let's look at Suspect here. What is sus? Let's look at Convenient Target. It doesn't add up. Airtight Alibi. Honestly, I don't think I've ever been as cracked up by names in a set as I am by this set so far, but Convenient Target is a single red mana for an aura that enchants a creature. When it ETBs, just suspect enchanted creature. Suspected creatures have menace and cannot block. That's what it does. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and you can pay 2 and a red to return Convenient Target from your graveyard to your hand. So that's cool. A little aura that keeps coming back, and you can pay 4 mana and just like slap it from your graveyard onto a guy. Like, I guess that's okay. Sometimes you want menace, a little boost for just a single mana, +1/+1. Okay, it's not like the worst card ever, but I really doubt that it's going in mono red. But what do I know? It sets off Monastery Swiftspear, so maybe it does, but I don't think this is better than the pump spells they're currently playing. But next is the one whose name kind of makes me laugh a little bit. It doesn't add up. It's 5 mana, 3 and 2 black for an instant. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Suspect it. It has menace and can't block. Again, I love the language of the mechanic here. Suspect it. That's neat. But by the way, did you catch it? Did you catch that this card is an instant? Now, obviously, the way Suspect works, you can't bring a creature back at instant speed during your opponent's combat step to block with it. You specifically can't do that, but you can still cast a 5 mana reanimation spell at the end of your opponent's turn. And ain't nothing wrong with that either, Jack. This is pretty good for a 5 mana reanimation spell. What is it, Graveyard Shift, that you have to like work to make that thing a 5 mana instant speed reanimator spell? This one is that, which I think is awesome. Then Airtight Alibi, another good name for a card. It's 3 mana, 2 and a green for an aura that enchants a creature and has flash. When it enters the battlefield, untap enchanted creature. It gains hexproof till end of turn. If it's suspected, it's no longer suspected. That's nice. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and can't become suspected because it has an airtight alibi. Again, this one is mostly extant because of flavor, but I guess it's a removal counterspell in limited, but I don't think it goes anywhere outside of there. We have way better cards that do stuff like this in standard for like a single mana. Hey, you guys ready for more new stuff? This time not a mechanic, but not really a card type either, but still a new sort of thing they're doing that they're calling cases. These are all kind of neat. They remind me of the class enchantments from Strixhaven. Yeah, it's got to be Strixhaven, right? But anyway, let's take a look at these, starting with Case of the Filched Falcon, which is a pretty obvious Maltese Falcon reference that you only get if you're old, but we also got to see Case of the Pilfered Proof and Case of the Ransacked Lab. Now, these all sound like Hardy Boys mysteries, but they're all kind of cool cards, honestly. Like Case of the Filched Falcon is just a single blue mana for an enchantment, which is a case, so it is a new card type. And listen up. When this case enters the battlefield, you investigate, so you get yourself a clue token. Now, to solve this case, you have to control 3 or more artifacts. If it's unsolved, you solve it at the beginning of your end step. That's kind of interesting. So as long as you got 3 artifacts, once the end of your turn hits, you'll solve the case. Now, once the case is solved, you can pay 2 and a blue and sacrifice the case to put 4 +1/+1 counters on an artifact, a non-creature artifact, and have it become a 0/0 bird creature token with flying in addition to its other types. Don't know why I read the word token. It's not there. It doesn't become a token. Just a non-creature artifact becomes a 4/4 flyer once you've solved the case and paid 3 mana. So I think that once you solve the case, the thing should just happen. That's just me. I don't want to also pay extra mana on top of the work that I've done, but this is okay, right? Just a single blue mana for a clue isn't a great deal, but it's not a terrible deal, and it's not that hard to control 3 artifacts. I kind of like this thing. I don't think it's going too many places, but, I think it's cool. Now, Case of the Pilfered Proof is up next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white. Whenever a detective enters the battlefield under your control, and whenever a detective you control is turned face up, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, to solve the case, you need 3 or more detectives. And if the case is solved, if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, put those tokens into play plus a clue token instead. Woo! So that's actually really sweet and not very hard to solve, all things considered. Not too hard to get into play in the first place. Kind of an interesting anthem-y sort of synergistic effect for your detectives deck if you want to build one. So that's cool. And your changeling deck as well, which I think is kind of neat. But either way, man, just a neatly designed little card that, just like the first one, is not that hard to solve. And in this case, once it is solved, it is a sick little ability. And this is, what I was complaining about on the first card. Like, hey, I solved the case. Well, I got to pay mana though. This one, you don't have to pay any mana. Just once you've solved it and it only costs 2 mana to get into play in the first place, then suddenly any token making you do is going to be really profitable for you. So I really like this. It kind of pigeonholes you into detectives or whatever, which is kind of lame, but still, really good piece for that deck. But I guess we got to look at Case of the Ransacked Lab next. These also kind of sound like Goosebumps titles to me, but Ransacked Lab is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a case. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Let's go. To solve, you've cast 4 or more instant and sorcery spells this turn. It's a lot. And if we have solved it, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, draw a card, cowboy or cowgirl. That's pretty good, man. Again, once you've got this thing solved, it doesn't cost you any extra mana. And I like that it makes up for the fact that you just slung a bunch of spells from your hand all on the same turn, so you're probably a little bit low on cards. Right? So at that point, you just have to cast like 1 instant or sorcery and start gassing back up. It's really, really sweet once you do have it solved. But the cost to cast it in the first place is kind of steep. And to be honest, the cost to solve it is steep too, you know. I feel like especially if you draw it late game, when you top deck it, there's not a whole lot of cards in your hand. This card is just kind of awful, you know, but even at that point, it's still cost reduction, which I guess you'll be relatively happy about. Looks like an interesting little commander card, and I'm not sure that it goes too far beyond that, but in standard, if you can get this to work, it's actually a pretty incredible little card draw engine, but you're asking a lot. But there were 4 cases previewed today, and I saved my favorite one for last. Let's look at Case of the Gorgons Kiss, a single black mana. For a case, when it enters the battlefield, destroy up to 1 target creature that was dealt damage this turn. Now, to solve this case, 3 or more creature cards have to be put into graveyards from anywhere this turn. And, when solved, this case is a 4/4 Gorgon creature with Death Touch and Lifelink, in addition to its other types. So you're telling me that all I got to do is cast a sweeper and blow up a certain number of creatures, and then suddenly I got a 4/4 lifelink Death Touch? That's what you're telling me? Now, just real quick before we get off this card, I do want to point out that a lot like your sister, it might be a little bit harder to get off than I'm initially making it sound, right? Because all I'm saying is that, hey, you get a sweeper down and you got a 4/4, but it's not going to be easy that most of the time. Realistically in the actual world, you know, maybe you come up against control and this is just a completely dead card in your deck, and that's never good. Maybe even against a creature deck, you never blow up enough creatures in the same turn to get your 4/4, at which case you devoted a slot in your deck and a whole mana to play this card and it never did anything. So again, it's not always going to be amazing, but maybe as a sideboard piece against aggro where you can ensure that you will get your 4/4 lifelink, and aggro is going to have a hard time coming back from that. So again, maybe a little sideboard piece, but I'm hoping it's as good as I think it is. Now, before we get to the rares and mythics and such for the day, we're almost there, I promise, but there are some kind of uncategorizable commons and uncommons here that just kind of fit a random category that I want to go through, because you really should know what all the cards in the set are as we get them. So let's look at Felonias Rage, as well as Market Watch Phantom and A Killer Among Us. Now, Felonias Rage is a single red mana for an instant. That's a good way to start a card. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. When that creature dies this turn, create a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. Love the flavor on this, if nothing else, right? Because the detective comes to check out the death, and it's kind of neat. But still now, hold the phone, my Arthur Fonzarelli, because this doesn't give the creature like trample or anything, and that's kind of poopy, but just +2/+0 and haste for a single red mana is kind of really good, you know? I'm not sure this is better than Monstrous Rage, which I think is still going to be all the rage in the mono red decks, and I don't think this really usurps it in terms of function, but still, I think this is really, really close, man. Like, you know, 2/2/0 and haste for a single red mana, that's usable, but even when it's not, you're going to get a 2/2 because your opponent targeted one of your guys with removal, and aggro wants that, so I kind of don't hate this. Market Watch Phantom is 1 and a white for a 2/2 Spirit Detective, and whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, Market Watch Phantom gains flying until end of turn. I think this is really, really cool and limited, to be honest. You know, a little evasive dude for a not embarrassing mana cost to power toughness ratio. Okay, let's kind of go. I kind of like it a little bit, but still, I don't think it's going to go anywhere outside of limited. I don't think the market will have to watch this one too closely. But let's look at A Killer Among Us. He said the thing. This is actually one of the funnier cards of the day, and I really like the flavor. It's 5 mana, 4 and a green for an enchantment. When A Killer Among Us enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human creature token, a 1/1 blue merfolk creature token, and a 1/1 red goblin creature token. Then secretly choose human, merfolk, or goblin. Sacrifice A Killer Among Us, Reveal the chosen creature type. If target attacking creature token is the chosen type, put 3+1/+1 counters on it, and it gains Death Touch until end of turn. So 5 mana for 3 power on 3 guys. It's an enchantment, right? So I guess it does. I just can't really get excited for it, to be honest. I mean, you could do some fun stuff with it. I really think the design is cool. This looks like a Gavin Verhey special, but I might be wrong on that. Either way, really, really fun design. I do love the flavor on it. I love the reference. We're already making references to a game that came out like 2 years ago. Like, what are we doing? But either way, sweet little card, but it's probably doing literally zilcho in standard, and even limited. I'm not sure this is actually that great of a card, but in a way, hold on now, in a way, it puts a buttload of power on the table, not just 3. It ends up putting a buttload of power on the table, right? For just a 5 mana and some Death Touch, and it can do tricksy stuff. Maybe I'm discounting a little bit too much. Maybe it's better in limited than I think, but it is going nowhere outside of that format. Let's finally finish off these commons and uncommons with a bang. I got a couple more slides full of cards left, but they are all cards that I think might actually be playable in standard. Can we get a couple of those? Jeez, Dev. Let's look at Long Goodbye to start things off, as well as Crawl, Whipcracker, and Galvanize. Now, Long Goodbye is just a nice little removal spell. Simple and clean like Hikari Utada. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an instant that cannot be countered. Destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. Thanks, Wizards. I just like seeing any card that can't be countered, especially like decently playable removal at instant speed for just 2. Like, yeah, this is well worth playing in a lot of decks. Now, Crawl Whipcracker over here is 2 mana, green and black for a 3/2 insect assassin with reach. And when it ETBs, destroy target token an opponent controls. Let's go, Golgari, man. This 2 mana, 3/2 reach is kind of a decent enough stat line. He wouldn't see play if it were just that, but we are far from embarrassing at just a 2 mana, 3/2 reach, but when you're able to just blow a token up, dude, that's really good. I actually think this might see play all the way back to like modern. Like, it definitely sees play in Pioneer, just any format where tokens matter literally at all. This could be a really, really sweet card. It's just 2 mana too, it's fine on turn 2 if your opponent's already up to something and doing tokeny stuff, but even on like turn 4 or 5, you can easily double spell, get yourself a 3/2 reach, blow up one of their guys, and have mana left to play more stuff. Like, come on, dude. I think this is actually one of the better cards we've looked at today. Easy. And as a matter of fact, it might remain one of the better cards we look at for a good portion of the rest of this video, man. But hey, Galvanize is pretty good too. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant that deals 3 damage to a creature. But if you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, Galvanize deals 5 damage to that creature instead. Again, at instant speed. So, you can just cast like a cheap little card draw spell or something during your opponent's attack step, and then suddenly you can 5 anything. That's really, really good, man. I wish that it hit planeswalkers or something too, but still, I think this is more than we can ask for from a lot of our red removal spells. It's cheap, it's instant, it can kill a Sheoldred some of the time, and it can really do those things a lot more easily on your turn. So there's some tension, some push-pull. Do I wait until I can draw 2 cards on my opponent's turn and then cast this? Or do I just kind of basically do it on at sorcery speed, which is not the best thing, but still, it's only 2 mana to kill some really big guys in your Izzet deck, which is probably where this is going most of the time. Just solid little piece of removal, and I like the design on this one too. Simple, clean, and the kind of thing that we don't really see often enough. But I heard you wanted to see the best lower rarity stuff of the day, and I've got some stuff to show you, buddy. Here's Crime Novelist to start off with, as well as No More Lies and Public Thoroughfare. Now, I'm actually going to go through these in reverse order because I think they deserve to be gone through in that order. But either way, Thoroughfare is a land that ETB's tapped, and you can tap it to add a mana of any color, but when it ETBs, you also have to sacrifice it unless you tap an untapped artifact or land that you control, which is a steeper cost than it looks like, right? If you want to play this on turn 2, you basically can't do anything else, which is really crappy. But I like just having a random artifact just kind of laying around, and suddenly you got a land that taps for any color. It comes into play tapped, yeah, sure, but still, the 2 lines of text that I read first, I did that on purpose, right? Because coming to play tapped, lame. Tap for any color? Okay, now we're talking. Hate that I have to tap other stuff, but it's not asking me to sack it or anything. You lose some tempo on this, but that could be easily worth it to snatch a land that taps for anything. That is incredibly powerful. But oh boy, everybody, you want to see a good card? Let's look at No More Lies. I always hear Linkin Park in my head when I read this card. No More Lies! This is 2 mana. White and blue for an instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. If that spell was countered this way, exile it. Jerk. Come on, man. You're telling me it's a mana leak in standard that also exiles? Come on. Come on. It's so good, dude. I know that it's a little bit difficult to cast, at least compared to Mana Leak, but I don't care. I really don't. This is an obviously strong counterspell. I was already sick of Make Disappear and like the Esper decks. Get ready, House, because this one's coming for you, man. Counter unless they pay 3 is obviously, in case you've never played against this, I still shouldn't have to tell you, that's a really, really good counterspell. But the fact that it's a dissipate, it also exiles, goo! I'm just going to make noises for the rest of this card. Boom! But let's finish off the commons and uncommons with the best card in the whole video. It could be, man. This is Crime Novelist here. 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 1/3 Goblin Bard. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Crime Novelist and add a red. And add red. Oh my goodness, man. This is where, the mood shifts a little bit. The first 15 minutes of the video, I got to introduce new mechanics. I got to look at bad cards and be like, well, guess you can do this in limited, man. But now we get to the stuff. Now we get to the primo stuff, baby. The stuff that actually makes me excited to be a Magic player again. You know what I mean? Look at the text on this card. Do I even have to do analysis or a review or anything? Can I just tell you to look at the text on this card, read it again in case you didn't catch it the first time, Sacrificing an artifact is not at all hard to do. And sure, we've got clues and blood tokens and standard and stuff that you have to pay mana for, but we also happen to have treasure tokens, not only in standard, but, Pioneer, Modern, Commander, whatever. So basically popping treasure tokens for 2 mana a pop, and he gets +1/+1 counter. What are you thinking, man? What are you thinking? If nothing else in Commander, this is the absolute tatas, you know what I'm saying? But aside from just Commander, this could be halfway decent in Standard, where it could get relatively big relatively quick. By the time it's a 3/5, it's actually a real body they have to deal with, and by the time it's a 3/5, it made a bunch of mana for you too. So in your Oni Cold Anvil deck, just get an extra mana every time you activate Anvil, goo. It's ridiculous, dude. And I'm just going to say one more time, treasures. You got a Dockside Extortionist in this card. Have all the fun, just to have fun. That's what Magic's for, right? Oh my God. I could do a whole video about this one guy and how good I kind of expect him to be. 3 mana is a little bit steep to cast him in the first place, but I don't think that's going to stop anybody playing him. He's awesome. But ooh, it's my face. Hey guys, I missed you a little bit. We do have to get to the rares and mythics. We finally made it together, hand in hand. I'm proud of you and I'm proud of me, to be honest. You should be proud of yourself sometimes. It's important. It's good for self-actualization, whatever. Anyway, let's get to the rares today. And as usual, we run into the problem of there has to be a first rare. There has to be a worst rare of the day. And look, it's not me. That's just how it has to be. So let's start that off by looking at a couple of them. We'll spread the love. We'll spread the hate. It's all love. It's all love, baby. Let's see what our first 2 rares of the day are. We got Kylox. That's a name. Visionary Inventor. And Agris Kos, Spirit of Justice. They have the 2 silliest names, so they're the worst rares in the set. Now, Kylox, and the more I read that name, the more I think it's actually a pretty strong name. I'm going to name my daughter Kylox. So Kylox, Visionary Inventor, is 7 mana, Hoss. It's so much mana. 5, and then a red and a blue Izzet colors. For a 4/4 legendary Viashino Artificer with Menace, Ward 2, and Haste. The haste is important because whenever it attacks, you'll sacrifice any number of other creatures and then exile the top X cards of your library, where X is their total power. You may cast any number of instant and or sorcery spells from among the exiled cards without paying their mana cost. Big, weird commander for Johnnies and stuff like that. People that love comboing and setting a whole thing up. This is probably for you, but it costs 7 mana, man, and your deck wants instants and sorceries in it because it wants to be able to cast a bunch of free instants and sorceries, but it also wants creatures in it. And, I guess you could play a bunch of instants and sorceries that create creatures. That helps solve that problem, but I still hate how at odds those two things are. It's just not, it's a 7-mana guy that still wants you to sack a bunch of stuff. Well, come on, dude. Like, I just, not a huge fan of this, but I know there are going to be some people out there who are, and I'm not going to yuck your yum. Let's also look at Agros Costs. It looks like it's an anagram for something, isn't it? We'll figure it out. But anyway, this is the Spirit of Justice. 4 mana, 2 a red and a white for a 2/4 legendary spirit detective with double strike and a vigilance. And when it enters the battlefield or attacks, choose up to 1 target creature. If that creature is suspected, exile it. Otherwise, suspect it. So when this comes into play, you get to point the finger at something. And then when it goes to attack next turn, you get to exile that thing, theoretically at least, which is kind of cool. And I like that this highlights the ability of suspect to be used defensively. You know, so far on some of these red cards and stuff, we've mostly seen it the way like the enrage status effect is in like Final Fantasy and other games like it. You know, you enrage your own guy, he's going to take more damage, but he's going to deal more damage, and he's a barbarian. You know, it's like, I can see how you would use this ability offensively, obviously, because menace is good and blocking's for losers. You know what I mean? So I get how that makes sense too, but you can also use it defensively to, you know, suspect your opponent's creatures and suddenly they can't block you, which is also sweet for your aggro deck. So I don't hate this guy. You know, I said that he's one of the worst rares of the day, which is saying something. And all that really means is that, you know, all the other rares must be pretty good, because this guy's not horrible. He's not good either, but he's definitely not horrible. But we're definitely going to take a step up here, because we got to look at Assassin's Trophy next. They reprinted Assassin's Trophy. You know what that card does? In case you don't, I'll tell you in just a second. But we also got to see Etrata, Deadly Fugitive, and Izoni, Center of the Web. In case you don't remember or you weren't around for Assassin's Trophy, it's one of the best removal spells ever printed, that's all. It's black and green for an instant. Destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle. So all the same questions we got last time. Hey, you're giving them some ramp. Isn't that bad? No, it's fine. Just shut up. It's fine. It's really 2 mana instant speed, destroy anything you want. Yeah, come on, man. That's a good spell. Etrata, Deadly Fugitive is a brand new card that's very interesting. It's 3 mana, 1 a blue and a black for a 1/4 legendary vampire assassin with Death Touch. A 3 mana 1/4 Death Touch. Kind of okay, just in and of itself, but face down creatures you control have 2 blue-black, turn this creature face up. If you can't, exile it, and then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Whenever an assassin you control deals combat damage to an opponent, cloak the top card of that player's library. Super duper sick, man. Like, again, 3 mana, 1/4 Death Touch is actually kind of a halfway decent stat line against a ton of decks, man. It's going to be hard to attack into this game, is all I'm saying, but I don't really care that much about the face down text. Not that much. I mean, the cool thing about this is that, again, a lot like the Boros legend we were just looking at, you don't really have to play other suspect cards in that deck for it to really matter. And you don't have to play a bunch of face down stuff in your deck for this one to matter, because the Etrata can get through for combat damage, cloak the top card of your opponent's libraries, and then suddenly you can just pay 4 mana to turn those cards face up if you actually pilfered something cool from the top. So I don't know, man. It's actually a decent card, you know. It's self-contained. It can win a game just more or less by itself. It's a credible threat. You actually want to attack with your 1/4 Death Touch here, but in case you don't want to attack with it, suddenly it's an amazing body defensively, so I kind of think this is better than it looks. But let's look at Izoni. You know me. She's at the center of the web here. This is 6 whole mana. 4 a green and a black for a 5/4 legendary elf detective with menace. And when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may collect evidence 4. If you do, create 2 2/1 black and green spider creature tokens with menace and reach. If you sacrifice 4 tokens, you can surveil 2 and then draw 2 and gain 2 life. 4 tokens is a lot of tokens to sacrifice. I really wish that you could just choose to sacrifice the 2 tokens that this came into play with if you collect evidence, right? And then just draw 2. That, you know, all that would be great. But this could still go in like Dina Commander just because it gains you life, and that's not terrible. It does stuff when it ETBs or attacks, and I kind of like that. We got to keep plowing through some rares here, so let's take a look at Melik, Reforged Researcher, and Tolsimir. Old Tolsimir's here, everybody. He's Midnight's Light. But let's look at Melik first. This is 5 mana, 3 in Is It colors are red and blue. For a Star legendary weird detective, he's a weird guy, and his power and toughness are each equal to twice the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. And, this is a fun line of text, the first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs 3 less to cast. That is a massive discount, man. If you paid 5 mana for this, then you basically, without even playing a land, can untap and play like an 8 mana thing. It's pretty sweet. If you do play a land, suddenly you can play a 9 mana thing. Or, you can just cast a spell at an amazing discount. Make sure you still have mana left for the counter spell or whatever spell you want to cast after. That's really sweet. And honestly, too, PT equal to twice the number, equal to twice of a Haughty Djinns or a Crackling Drake or whatever that card was called. Either way, that's actually a great line of text. This could be like an 8/8 very, very easily. It's going to be a 6/6 most of the time when it comes down without you really having to do too much work outside of just playing Magic. So this actually looks kind of cool, but it doesn't have that many keyword abilities or really any keyword abilities, to be honest. So you have to untap with it and play to really do anything. So these are powerful lines of text. And I think this might be fun Commander, especially like Standard Brawl on Arena. It could be fun there, but I'm not really sure it does much in Standard given the relatively steep cost and the fact that you do have to untap with this in play to do too much of anything with it. Although I do feel compelled to like I have to say really, that if you spend 5 mana on this and you have any open mana whatsoever, it's very likely you'll be able to cast an instant the turn you play this. So just because you cast this doesn't mean you're necessarily done for the turn, but you do have to have at least one other open mana. Well, let's take a look at Tolsimir, see what he's bringing to the party. A big wolf, that makes sense. He's 5 mana. 2 a green and 2 white for 3/2 Elf Scout, legendary guy, with lifelink. And when he ETBs, you create Voha Fernstalker, Finstalker, a legendary 5/5 green and white wolf creature token with trample. Whenever a wolf you control attacks, if Tolsimir also attacked this combat, target creature an opponent controls blocks that wolf this combat if able. 5 mana, 8 power, 2 guys, trample, and lifelink, depending on which guy you're talking about, and the ability to kind of remove stuff a little bit. But would it be kind of weird to you if I said I still don't think this is probably quite good enough for Standard? If you're 5 mana, you have to be really good, like unbelievably stupid good in Standard to be 5 mana and be a playable card. So I'm just really not sure this is quite there, right? But still, 8 power. Trample's always better than you think, right? Still, I'm not quite sure, guys. Sorry. I love Tolsimir and I love wolves. I could tell a whole story about why I love wolves as much as I do and how much they mean to me, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do it. All I'm going to say is that as much as I want to like a card, I still have to try to be objective. And I'm just not really seeing it with this, despite the fact that 10 years ago, this would have been the best card in Standard, but we're just not there anymore. But speaking of Voha, got its own card. It's pretty cool. Voha Jaws of the Conclave is also 5 mana. It's 2 and Naya colors, a red, a green, and a white for a 5/5 wolf. Checks. It's got Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 3. When it's by itself, it gets 2 extra keyword abilities. And when Voha Jaws of the Conclave attacks, you put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control. You also draw a card for each wolf you control. So this is the only thing on the table. You have a 5/5 or 3 keywords that draws a card when it attacks. All right, man. It's fine. If you have even one elf out, it's unbelievable. So that's kind of a good thing about it. But mostly I just like that this is kind of a commander that wants you to mix elves and wolves, which is kind of awesome. I like the idea of building that deck. You know what I mean? That's all some commanders got to be is, hey, I'm interested in building that. Elves wolves mashup. Okay, let's go, DJ. It's fine. So if this, the only reason this card needs to exist is to get people excited to build that deck, and I am. Therefore, mission accomplished. I like it. Let's keep it pushing, pusher, as well as pimpin'. Let's look at Aurelia's Vindicator next, as well as Axebane Ferox. Now, Vindicator is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for a 4/2 angel with flying lifelink and ward 2. But it's also got Disguise, X3, and a white. It could be a relatively high, disguise cost, but let's see what it does. When it's turned face up, exile up to X other target creatures from the battlefield and or creatures from graveyards. When Vindicator leaves the battlefield, return the exiled cards to their owner's hands, which I think is kind of neat. They don't come like back into play or anything, or there might be some weird reanimation tricks you could do with this, but instead you might be able to, during combat, save one of your creatures, or maybe, blow out your opponent by putting one or two of their creatures back into their hand during their own combat step. So that'd be cool, So there's a lot of stuff this card is theoretically at least capable of doing. I think it's interesting, by the way, that just like some of the other cards I was talking about, this is a mythic, but you still can't really blow anybody completely out on blocks naturally. The card is sort of designed to blow people out on blocks, but it's still a 2 toughness guy even after you flip it up. So it could still die in combat depending on what you do, but I imagine most of the time if you have the mana, you'll send whatever's blocking it back to your opponent's hand, right? But again, a card that can be used aggressively or defensively on your own guys or your opponent's guys. All that's really sweet, right? Even if you're not using it for reanimation, you still can get cards back from your graveyard and then effectively get 3 or 4 cards worth of card advantage when this ends up dying. And that's pretty sick too. So it's an all around great thing that, again, just like some of the other cards in the video, might be a lot better than it looks at first glance, even despite being obviously mana intensive. But Axebane Ferox is a sturdy little creature. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 green for a 4/4 beast with Death Touch and haste. And here's the cool part: ward, collect evidence 4. Now, here's the thing about collecting evidence. It depends on what card we're looking at, because we just looked at Izoni and I was like, now collect evidence 4 might not be that bad. But I look at a card like this and I'm like, they are never going to be able to collect evidence 4 and target this thing. I'm pretty sure that's the way I'm going to go. And honestly, if they do collect evidence and actually target it with something, and then you respond with like a Tamiyo's Safekeeping or some other card like it, Royal Treatment, removal counterspell, right? Then suddenly it might as well have hexproof. Most decks aren't going to be able, for the most part at least, to collect evidence for more than a time or two in, the course of a couple of turns. So if they collect evidence 4 and they only have a couple of lands left in their yard, and you somehow counter that removal spell, then basically you just have a 4/4 Death Touch guy for like the rest of the game. So I think this is really sweet. I don't know if it's better than, an Ulvenwald Oddity or some other similar creature in its slot in Standard right now. And Ulvenwald Oddity has even long since stopped seeing play, So I'm not sure it's as good as I want it to be, but what we're kind of a little bit looking at here is a 4 mana 4/4 haste that's really difficult to target. Like almost hexproof, but not quite. So again, I'm going to say it one more time and probably another time or two after that. I think this is probably better than it might look to some people, because we're used to seeing cards like this and kind of yawning at them at this point. But collect evidence 4 as a ward is a lot better than I think it looks at first glance. But next, let's keep going with these rares, man. We got No Witnesses, as well as Trostani, 3 Whispers, and Tomic, Wielder of Law. Now we're starting to get into some stuff that I think looks a little bit more playable, man. No Witnesses is 4 mana, 2 and 2 white for a sorcery. Each player who controls the most creatures investigates, then destroy all creatures. Just got a Wrath of God here that it's a little bit like a Depopulate in that it draws them a card, but I guess the difference is that Depopulate might draw them a card sometimes, but when it does, it draws them a card right then and there. This always draws them a card, technically, but it's always going to cost them mana to get their card, which I do like, If I'm playing Fateful Absence in my deck, I might as well play this too. If I'm going to give them a clue for that, for killing one guy, I might as well give them a clue for killing like 5 of their dudes. Now, Trostani is a freaking house. This is Trostani 3 Whispers, man. A green, a white, and then a Selesnya hybrid mana. For a 4/4. Legendary Dryad, you're doing your math? That's a 3 mana 4/4 right there. You can pay 1 and a green to have a creature gain Death Touch until end of turn. You can also pay a green-white hybrid to have a creature gain Vigilance until end of turn. Or you can pay 2 and a white to have any creature gain Double Strike until end of turn. So if you're doing the math again there, that's 5 mana to make her a Double Strike Death Touch, which is a really hard combination to block. So if you come in with a bunch of open mana, your opponent's going to be hard-pressed to block this. But if they don't, they might take 8 damage. So, what this reminds me of a little bit? Morphling. It doesn't have in creatures like it, it doesn't have like a protection mode on it, which is not really like a Morphling, but that is a ton of activated abilities and a veritable Swiss Army knife's worth of keyword abilities that you can give this card. And note, I keep saying like, oh, it can give itself death touch. It can give itself double strike. It can give any creature these abilities. So the fact that it doesn't even have to swing in, it can just give a dude double strike. Like, please. Yes, please. Like, and on top of that, it's a 3-mana 4/4. Spot the downside. Can't do it. But don't look now, everybody. It's an Orzhov legend, so Dev is obligated to like it. The good thing is, it's actually a good card. It's 3 mana, 1, a white, and a black for Tomik, Wielder of Law. This is a 2/4 legendary human advisor with affinity for planeswalkers. Neat. It has flying and vigilance, and whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, that opponent loses 3 life, and you draw a card. This card costs 3 mana. This is a 3 mana 2/4 with 2 keyword abilities. So I just want, a 3 mana 2/4 flying vigilance is kind of, like, that's already good, I guess. I mean, it's not like worth playing your deck just because of that. But that's already pretty good. It's not embarrassing. And then suddenly, if your opponent ever attacks you with 2 guys, draw cards. I mean, the bolt is good too. 3 mana or 3 damage that's pretty good. But you just draw. They attack you. That's the thing they're going to want to do, I assume, right? So they attack you, draw a card. Come on, dude. Come on. That's so good, man. Like, this is very close to my top 5 cards of the day, but it's definitely in my top 10 cards of the day. And I'd say we got more than 10 cards that I want to try out in standard. This is definitely one of them. I haven't even talked about the fact this could cost you 2 mana if you already have a planeswalker, but even if you have to pay the full price for it, and if it also matters if they attack your planeswalkers. It's not just they attack you. So you want to get in on my Emperor or Kaya or whatever. You gotta let me draw some stuff. God, that's unbelievably good, man. But let's keep going. We got other stuff to look at. We got to look at stuff like Homicide Investigator and Kellen Inquisitive Prodigy. Again, things are starting to look up now, man. Homicide Investigator is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/2 human detective. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. So boo on that, but the rest of the card's awesome. Just, again, commander playable if nothing else. And I'm not really sure if this is competitive constructed 60 card deck playable, whether we're talking about standard, pioneer, whatever. Explorer, who knows what you like, but either way, I could see this being almost there in formats like standard and all the way there in formats like commander, where I do admit that the once per turn thing is kind of a hamstring. It's not something you want to be doing, but still, in your aristocrats decks, I want to try this in my LSO core deck. I want to try this in Judith, right? So I don't know that it's going to be amazing, but investigate at least once per turn. It probably adds up, especially considering you just sacrifice a guy on your turn and then sacrifice a guy on your opponent's turn and sacrifice a guy on your opponent's turn. And you're basically getting 4 clues per turn cycle. And it's not even that difficult to do. So he probably is busted. But we also got to look at Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy, man. This Kellen guy is just everywhere. He's all over the place. He's 4 mana, 2, a green and a blue for a 3/4 legendary human fairy detective with flying and vigilance. And whenever he attacks, you destroy up to 1 target artifact. If you controlled that permanent, draw a card. That's kind of cool. But the real cool part of this is the adventure mode. Tail the suspect. For a blue and a green, you get a sorcery. Investigate. You may play an additional land this turn. So it's not Growth Spiral. Growth Spiral is just way better. It's just a better card. It just draws you the card immediately. And that's, you're getting a 2 mana discount with a Growth Spiral. You just draw the card. It's awesome. But with this, you get an artifact in play. Growth Spiral doesn't do that. Maybe you do something with the artifact, like sack it to the Kellen later when you attack with it and you draw a card, So that's kind of cool. I just like Kellen too. I think that Kellen is kind of okay. I don't know how many Cynic or Soul Tie decks or whatever he's going to be going in anytime soon. I don't think he has a home in standard day 1. But, that said, you got a little bit of ramp here, a little Growth Spiral-y kind of thing. You do cast it on turn 2, you get your 3rd land out. Theoretically, turn 3, you can play a 4th land, go ahead and play Kellen. Probably not going to take that line most of the time, but it could happen. And then you got a 3/4 Flying Vigilance, which is actually not a terrible body, but it's not great either, but still, this is a Cynic card that can take artifacts off the other side of the table. It's got a removal mode on it, which I always like. It's a difficult to block body. Vigilance is always a better ability than you think, So just the fact that you get a decent body out of this after you cast Growth Spiral is what's making me think that it might be there with Growth Spiral, but it's not. To be honest, it's not. Growth Spiral is just a million times better, but Again, you attach it to a body, I'm at least going to be interested. But believe it or not, there are more cards. But these are all still cards that I think might be playable in Standard, if nothing else. So let's take a look at Sharp-Eyed Rookie, as well as Krenko, Baron of 10th Street. Hey, buddy. And Teysa, Opulent Oligarch. You know I'm going to like that card, but let's start with Sharp-Eyed Rookie. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 human detective with vigilance. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if its power is greater than Rookie's power or its toughness is greater than Rookie's toughness, put a +1/+1 counter on Rookie and investigate. Here we go, son. So you're telling me I play this on turn 2, and then turn 3, I'm almost guaranteed to make it a 3/3 and investigate and then attack, and I have a clue too? Like, come on, man, that's good. Like turn 4, it's pretty easy again to make this at that point a 4/4. And get another clue, you know? So it's just, God, seems great. You're probably not going to get it too much higher than 4/4 or 5/5. But if you did that, you paid 2 mana for a 5/5 and you have 3 clues on the table. Like, what else do you want? You know, I'm pretty sure this is close to like a Tireless Tracker without actually being anywhere near as good as Tireless Tracker. But still, it's like halfway between a Tireless Tracker and like a Kyrion Beast Collar or a Galagreeters or a card like that. And those are all really sick cards that I like a lot. So I'm happy with this card. But guess who's back? Back again. It's Krenko, Baron of 10th Street, 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/3 legendary goblin with it a haste, and you can tap him and sack an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on each goblin you control, including Krenko, by the way. Whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay red. If you do, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token, gains haste until end of turn, and notably, you can do that as many times a turn as you want to. It doesn't just trigger once per turn like you might expect. This actually goes really well with the novelist that we looked at earlier. Whenever you sack an artifact, it gets +1/+1 counter, and you add red. So basically, when you have these two guys together, just whenever you sack an artifact, get a 1/1 with haste, which is, you know, not bad. So I think this is a very, very cool commander. Even though it's in mono red, I think it's still got a lot to do. I like that it can activate the turn it comes into play, but in Standard, this is a 3 mana, 3/3 haste. That's a fine stat line for like a mono red deck. So again, not embarrassing is the key to this card. You know, you can attack with this in Standard fairly profitably, pressure your opponent's life total on turn 3, and all that's good. But if you have other stuff you want to do with it, there's plenty of other stuff to do with it, you know? Like, it's goblin specific. You know, I'm always going to love some goblin support, right? But I'm pretty sure you can put together a deck in Standard right now that not only relies on artifacts somewhat heavily, but also plays goblins. I have done it in the recent past. So I don't know, man. Just all the text on this leads me to believe it's a card that's way more than the sum of its parts, and all the sum of its parts are pretty great, man. You know, being able to put counters on all of your goblins, having a 3 mana, 3/3 haste, being able to make more goblins for that matter. Like, yeah, this is all absolutely stupid. So I think this is an amazing card in a lot of ways. Speaking of amazing cards, though, let's look at Teysa, Opulent Oligarch up next. 3 mana, 1, a black and a white for a 2/3 legendary human advisor with Death Touch. At the beginning of your end step, investigate for each opponent who lost life this turn. Whenever a clue you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. This ability only triggers once each turn. Why? Why does it only trigger once each turn? I have to pay 2 mana to sacrifice a clue. Now, note that you can get the token whether or not that's why you sack the clue. You can like bargain a clue away and get a 1/1. So that's kind of neat. You know, if there's other things that let you sack a bunch of artifacts, you could have theoretically gotten a bunch of tokens at once if this didn't say once a turn. And what I say to that is that would be fun and like hard to set up and probably mana intensive to set up. And if I can pay it off, I deserve to be able to pay it off. You know what I mean? But still, they decided to throw once a turn on this. And I think that does make it suck a little bit, but still, I will compare yet another card in this video to Tireless Tracker, you know, an Orzhov Tireless Tracker. It's a 3 mana creature, right? It investigates just about every turn the same way Tracker does. That's pretty cool, you know? So, and in this case, unlike Tracker, this can also put other things onto the table, which I just think is great, you know? Remember that most of the time when you get that 1/1, you're also drawing a card, you know? So that's just kind of okay, man. I think 3 mana is relatively steep, and we're not in the same Standard that Tireless Tracker was so good in, you know? And Tireless Tracker, obviously, it cares about lands and stuff, whereas this cares about dealing damage to your opponent, which is a little bit different. You're not guaranteed to do this every single turn, but there's plenty of, ways to not even attack your opponent and make them lose a little bit of life. And then suddenly just getting a clue every single turn for like a drain. Like, let's say you have like a curse of leeches out or something like that. Well, actually, does that work? Let's just say you have something that deals 1 damage to your opponent every single turn without having to attack. Then suddenly you're getting your clue guaranteed. That's not bad. So I don't know. This could definitely pile up. And even after the table has been wiped, you have like 2-3 clues just sitting there ready to be cracked. Like, yeah, that's a pretty good legacy for the Teysa to leave behind once she's gone. So I probably talked about this card for way too long. It's just another one of those cards that probably looks a little underwhelming through a lot of modern Magic eyes. But, this kind of incremental advantage could actually be decent, even in a game of, nowadays standard Magic. But here we are, everybody. My top 5 cards of the day. Are we in list mode now officially? Let's roll with it, whatever. Let's look at Massacre Goyle. Massacre Goyle over here, 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a 4/4 legendary human assassin with vigilance. Are you a vampire assassin, actually? No, you're a human assassin. I just have to read cards every now and again to make sure. But either way, look at this line of text. Creatures you control have wither. They're bringing back wither, probably just for this one card, but still, creatures you control, including Goyle herself, deal damage in the form of -1/-1 counters. And by the way, whenever a creature your opponent controls with toughness less than 1 dies, draw yourself a card. I think this is a fun commander. Like, first of all, like, you can just play all the stuff that minuses, like your opponent's creatures. There are a ton of black cards that do that, from Grasp of Darkness to Mire's Grasp to Deadweight to blah, blah. There's a million of these, right? If I named them all, I'd be here all night. But that's why this is a pretty fun little commander, right? But obviously, this could be halfway decent in, 60 card competitive environments. Obviously, the 4-drop slot in black has a lot of competition right now. It's a really good slot, but Wither is a fun ability. Wither is a dangerous and good ability as well, which is what really matters for our purposes here. And of course, drawing all them cards, baby, drawing like 2-3 cards off of Massacre Girl is going to be real fun and honestly relatively easy, I think, like most of the time. You don't even have to play like bad cards in your deck. But I guess my number 4 would have to be Analyze the Pollen, a silly name and probably my least favorite story beat from the story so far. It's kind of just, I don't know, it's subjective, right? But it's dumb to me. Like, oh, we found an interesting, mysterious, unravnican strain of pollen. That's dumb. I don't know. Again, it's just me. If you like it, that's fine. I think it's silly. But either way, it's Magic. It can be silly. Who cares? But either way, the card itself looks great. Just a single green mana for a sorcery. Go search your library for a basic land. Okay, but if you collect evidence 8 when you cast this card, instead, you can go search your library for a creature or land card and put that into your hand. So if you can collect evidence 8, you get yourself a worldly tutor that just puts the card in your hand rather than on top of your library. That's really, really good. We had stuff like Traverse the Ulvenwald in the relatively recent past. Actually, not that recent. I'm old, but still, I think this might be right there with Traverse in terms of playability, and that's saying a lot. Traverse was a great card, and again, I think this is very comparable in power level to a card like that. Collect Evidence 8 is a lot, again, especially when you remember that, like, lands and stuff don't count. So it kind of sucks, but still, I think relatively, mid game, turn 5, turn 6, this becomes a tutor that goes and gets a creature and very often casts it that same turn because the mana is so light to cast this in the first place. So I think it's going to be good in most green decks. Now my number 3 is somehow Judith, which means the couple of cards after her must be amazing because you know me, my heart is always with Judith. Like she could be one of the stinkiest cards in the set, and I would still love her. And I think that might be happening here, but I also don't care. It's my video. This is 5 mana, 3 a black and a red for a 3/4 legendary human shaman. Interesting creature type. And here's the deal, guys. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you choose one of these things. Either that spell gains Death Touch and Lifelink. Can't even say that with a straight face. Or you create a little 2/2 imp guy, and whenever that guy dies, it deals 2 damage to any target. So you get like a super imp. It's like we've seen these imp creatures before, where they die and they deal like a damage to a thing or whatever. But again, this is a beefy imp, so I think that's cool. Just a sick card, man. 5 mana is an awful lot to get this on the table in the first place. maybe you spend 6 mana on it total, right? Like you wait until you have a 6th land untapped, you play it, and then you play, I don't know, In the Festivities. Then you win the game. You just wrath your opponent's side of the table for a single mana. That seems okay, but there's obviously way better stuff than just In the Festivities you can do with this. Just these two things, just come on. You don't want to play this in Commander? Like, you don't want to build a Commander deck around this? What are you completely heartless? You have no emotion anymore in your life? Well, come on, man. I know it's 5 mana, and maybe you don't even play Commander, but does the card kind of get you interested in playing Commander? Again, like, even just a little bit? Like, jeez Louise. Steep mana cost on this, I agree. And I'm not even sure that it's really destined for Standard or anything, but it's a fun and interesting enough looking Commander that I think will actually be a popular Commander too. That it's going to be all the way up here. Again, I just like Judith, so that's probably doing it a little bit too. But I don't know. If you're at the point in your Magic playing career where you can see these lines of text, cast an instant or sorcery and do one of these things, and you're just not excited about that at all, then like, I don't know, man. Why are you here? You know, we get excited about cards around here. But my number 2, man, like in any other set, this would be my favorite card in the whole set. But here we are. This set looks pretty crazy. It's War Leader's Call right here. 3 mana, 1 in Boros colors, red and white for an enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1. And also impact trimmers. Whenever a creature comes into play under your control, is deal a damage to each opponent. It's an impact trimmers. It's just an impact tremor in Standard for 3 mana. It costs more, but you also get an Anthem. So it's a Glorious Anthem and an Impact Tremors. It's a Glorious Anthem and an Impact Tremors. I love this card. It's going to be in every cube that I ever make. I have a hard time finding Boros cards for cubes that I really like. Not anymore, baby. We got Impact Tremors. Impact Tremors in Standard, everybody. Can I just say that one more time? Do you remember? Were you here back when Impact Tremors was in Standard? And like, I don't know, every deck had Impact Tremors in it, and we just had a great time making fun budget decks and blowing people out. Man, what a good time, and we get to have them again. Look, I don't want my Impact Tremors to cost 3, and I do think it gets substantially worse when it does, but you can't stop me from being excited either. It's like I was saying with that last card. We get excited for cards around here, and when you basically reprint Impact Tremors stable to an Anthem, like, oh! The card's obviously going to be nuts in Commander. Every Boros deck that anyone ever plays for the rest of time has to play this card. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think that's just 100% true. But I also think in Standard, it's kind of just good, you know? Like a 3-mana Anthem effect isn't the best thing in the entire world. But again, staple it to Impact Trimmers. Suddenly your aggro deck likes that a lot. My voice almost gave out. That's how excited I am. A lot. So I need to take a little sip here before we move on to our final card of the day. But boy, again, the card must be absolutely disgusting if it's going to be better than Impact Tremors in my mind. So I'm happy to inform you that it is the final card of the day, my favorite card of the day, and maybe when the smoke settles and the dust clears, it might be my favorite card in the set, even though we've only seen like 20% of the set so far. It's Kaya. I'm going to read this one because it's got a lot of text on it. It would be weird for me to have memorized all of this. I would have to be some kind of just amazing genius prodigy. I am those things, but I'm not this good. Kaya's Spirit Justice. Spirit's Justice? I'm not a prodigy. This is 4 mana, 2 a white and a black for a 3 loyalty legendary Kaya Planeswalker. Whenever one or more creatures you control and or creature cards in your graveyard are put into exile, you may choose a creature card from among them. Until end of turn, target token you control becomes a copy of the creature, except it has flying. You can +2 this Kaya to Surveil 2 and then exile a card from a graveyard. See where that's going. On a +1, you can create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. And on a -2, there's no ultimate here, by the way. Exile target creature you control. For each other player, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. So maybe I was a little hasty earlier when I called this the best Zombify ever printed on Twitter. And I said that as a guy who's played Dread Return a bunch of times. I still think Dread Return is the best Zombify ever printed, and it probably will never be usurped for that matter. But still, this is a pretty good little 4-mana Reanimator spell, but it does have some obvious downsides. The first one being that you're not really going to get any ETB triggers off of this, right? You know, let's say you do exile something from your graveyard. Cool, right? Let's say you do turn a token into that thing or a copy of that thing. Well, it's only going to last for that turn. which is kind of butts. And again, the token was already in play. It didn't interplay, so you're not going to get any ETB triggers. So that means what you're mostly going to be trying to target is the biggest, dumbest dude in your graveyard, like a 9/9 trample or whatever. You want to get him, or maybe you want to grab something that has an attacks trigger, which we've already seen a few of in this video, so it shouldn't be too hard to cobble together. Swiss Army Knife does a little bit of everything for any situation. You need a blocker, you need an attacker, it does that. You need to blow that thing up, it does that. You need to kind of look at what's coming up in your library, does that. You need to keep your opponent from getting that attracts out of their graveyard next turn, does that. You need to make one of your creatures into a thing, does that. Or one of your tokens into a creature, does that. Just like, you need to get this guy out of your graveyard, make a copy of him, does that. Just like literally... Name a thing that you can do in Magic. This basically will, it's almost guaranteed to do that thing. So, like, amazing looking card here for honestly a pretty good cost. 4 mana might be steep to some people, but I think it's about right for what this card's doing, which is, again, everything. But oh my goodness, we made it, y'all. I've been standing here talking this whole time. I'm probably like red. How long does Audacity say that it's been? Oh, baby. I got to show you this. Even if it means I got to like set the camera back up. Can you guys see my Audacity? Hold on. Let's get it down here. Can you guys actually see what that says? That says 2 hours, 28 minutes right there. And now my camera's like flashing at me. The red light's flashing at me. So I've got to finish this up, because I don't think there's much time on my SD card. I love you guys. Let me know how you felt about everything in the comments section. Those are my favorite cards of the day. And in fact, every single card from the day. I've been Deb from The Place. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Like the video if you haven't done that yet. And of course, check out our Patreon if you want to support all the work that we do here on the channel. It's just $1 a month, and you can vote on what decks we do once we get to Murders of Karlov Manor standard in the first place. So that's basically all I have to say. That's Itski Slowitsky. That's all Ski Kowalski, and I am donezo for this one. So thanks for sticking through the entire thing. There's a buttload more to come this season, so make sure again you're subbed to the channel if you haven't done it yet, so that we show up in your notifications and you get the videos when they come out. Okay, I think I somehow actually did this before my card ran out of space. I love you guys. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind. Good first day of spoilers. I've still got time in this video if I want it. I just go until the camera cuts off. Spread love and be kind.